to become a son of the law. Everything that the synagogue had turned somber and whispers. He has given us freedoms that we could not have expected. He was born in 12 AD. His ancestors had fled to Cilicia and to Tarsus just a little over 100 years earlier, during the time of the Israeli war with Syria, which developed into the Maccabean revolt. The town of Tarsus, since nestled at the bottom of the Taurus Mountains, 12 miles inland from the Mediterranean in the farthest north and eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea. Nonetheless, it is a seaport town. It is 12 miles in from the sea, but there is a river called the Cednus River, Cednus, that flows from the city into the Mediterranean Sea and can hold the largest ships in all the world. Those can navigate right up to the very center and heart of the city. It is the three intellectual cities of the world, coming third in behind Athens and Alexander of Egypt. Some of the best known and well thought of philosophers in all the world have taught in the city of Tarsus. The name of those teachers are august, but for a Jewish boy growing up in Tarsus, he would never darken the door of any Greek school. His education was totally and completely within the walls of his home and then the synagogue that was located there. While as a child, his earliest recollections were of stories his mother told him about the great people of the Jewish Hebrew race, of Joshua, of Saul, after whom he had been named, and men like Samson and Deborah and Moses. These were the names that lived within his heart. But at the age of 6, he was transferred to the synagogue there with other boys his age. He was taught in Hebrew the Torah. The education was very simple. The teacher would make a statement, the teacher being the rabbi, and the student would repeat. Statement, repeat. Statement, repeat. This was his education until he reached the age of 13. At the same time, he was becoming trilingual, quadrilingual. Hebrew in his home, also that strange language that had been spoken and was still spoken by Jesus, Aramaic. Out in the city, he had learned to speak Greek. And because his father did so much business with Latin and with Latin soldiers, he was obliged also to learn that language. So he could move comfortably between Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic. by the time he reached 13 years old. As he wandered the streets, the dominant language was Greek. But many, many soldiers made their way to Tarsus of Cilicia for one reason only. Out of the 60 to 80,000 soldiers that were commanded by the Roman Empire, every one of them carried their own tent. But there was only one kind of tent in the world that was waterproof, and that was the one who were manufactured in the city of Tarsus. And it was to this clientele, this trade, that Saul's father was engaged in. As he walked the streets of the city, he saw the gymnasium, he saw the amphitheater, he saw the great circle racetrack where many games were played and many horse races were done. It was called the Hippodrome. It was a city of the same makeup and composition in its games and its outlook as was Rome. The one thing that was looked upon as the best of a young man was how fast he could run and how far he could run. And after that was jumping and wrestling. These are activities that Saul never once engaged in. Nor did he ever walk into the Hippodrome. He heard about the races. He knew them well. And then there were the baths of the city, all of them decorated with great legendary heroes of the past and of the present. Great athletes had done daring things would find that their bust, engraved in marble, would often be found in the little alcoves of the baths. Again, none of this ever touched the young man Saul. At the age of 13, he engaged in a ritual, and that ritual was as old as the days of Moses. And it matters not what place you might be anywhere in the world, the word is always spoken the same way. Bar Mitzvah. Bar meaning son, Mitzvah of the law. There in that ceremony, so prized and looked forward to, so envied and so desired for any Hebrew child to become a son of the law, that until that day he had heard of the law, had been taught the law. Now from that day forward he was to obey of the law. And so there was given to him something to put on his arm. And the word was tefillah, a little box strapped to his arm with a small scroll with a scripture on it. A man could not enter a Jewish synagogue without that small box attached to his arm. And Saul would have that tefillah torn off his arm again and again. And again and again, he found another to take its place. But to have it ripped from your arm was to say, this man is not a son of the law. It was still while he was early in his time, his age, that even as a small child, he knew what it was he would soon be doing and anticipating. It all had to do with a proverbial saying that was lost somewhere there in antiquity. It goes like this: any Hebrew does not teach his child a skill is raising a thief. For a man without a skill will eat the bread of other people rather than his own, thereby stealing food from the mouth of another. There was another proverb, and it was, let no rabbi use his place in society to shirk the responsibility of working with his own hands. And so it was that in introduction to the skill he would be taught, Saul's father took him high up into the mountains above Cilicia. The hills to the east and to the west were covered with a strange-looking creature, sheep, that had the wiriest, thickest of all wool. So for days, with his father, he traveled almost hand over fist until he came to the top of the Taurus Mountains. The Taurus Mountains, reaching on the east of him, were about 40 miles. But toward the west, they reached all the way to Galatia and to Pamphylia, over 200 miles. There, on the top of the Taurus Mountains, he watched his father trade with the shepherds. These were friends of his father. They had been purchasing, having wool purchased from his father throughout the lifetime, not only of his father, but his grandfather, his great-grandfather, and his great-great-grandfather. And so the wool was cut with a knife there in the front of Saul's own eyes. Sack after sack after sack was purchased by his father, and then the shepherds would bring it all the way to Tarsus. Once it was there, it was Saul's duty to learn how to pull that wool apart by hand until it was tiny, thin strips of wool. And then that wool was spun round and round as it was fed onto the spindle. After that was done, the somewhat thread-like wool was then put into a still spinning wheel, and there was refined even more until finally there was a spool, an almost endless spool of thread made from the wool of the Cilician goat and the Cilician sheep. It was the hair, the wool of the Cilician sheep that was the most sought after of all the wool within the Roman Empire. And so the thread was attached north and south upon a loom, and then with a shuttle, in and out, from east to west. Horizontally, his shuttle went back and forth. Then was brought down hard the looms, hard blow, pushing thread against thread, ever and again and again and again, until it was so compressed it would do something that no other wool in the wool world could do. It could repel water. It was for this that the Cilician wool was sought of throughout the world, primarily by soldiers of the empire and for slaves' garments, for it wore for a long, long time, and even for the sails of the ships who plied the Mediterranean Sea. His grandfather would often speak that there were other uses for this material. It could also be dyed into beautiful colors, and with the skill of the best of those who were weavers, great pieces of material could be placed together and then dyed in beautiful colors, the most revered and the most exclusive of all colors being that of purple, for it was to be used only for those of the royal families of the different nations of the world. And so it was a young boy learned to pull the wool of sheep out of a sack, separate it, spin it, then put it on a wheel and spin it again until it had become refined and fine thread. Thread which was made into wool. Many a days, someone would come to the door of their home, inquiring and being escorted but never touched to the back of the building, and these tall, hardened, often scarred men, the legion of the Roman Empire, would haggle for the purchase of a tent. Saul also learned how to bring one piece of cloth to another and weave them into one. He also learned how to repair the cloth. He also learned how to attach copper pins together so that the can be wrapped around sticks of wood until they can hold up a tent the size of a man. It was here he had learned Latin. It was here he expanded his understanding of the world around him, for he found men coming there from what seemed to be endless nations of the world. It was also from his father that he learned exactly what the Roman Empire was. There had been Persians to the east who had been defeated by a gentleman named Alexander the Great, and established the Greek Empire that stretched from India to the east and all the way to the British Isles to the west. And he also learned that that empire had fallen to the Romans. There were 104 provinces that made up the Roman Empire. The main language was Greek, but Latin was spoken almost exclusively with the soldiers who were stationed all over the Roman Empire. He learned that the ships by the thousands plowed their way across the Mediterranean Sea in tight schedules, moving from east to west, north to south, right to left, constantly on schedule, buying, selling, loading, unloading, in a great commerce that covered the entire Mediterranean Sea. But there are other things that he learned. He learned that there was a city, the most beautiful city in the world, and that one day he would be able to go there, and from time to time he would go to that city, for his father went every year, and there would be a great gathering of all the Hebrew people for one great celebration in the springtime. And he looked forward to that day. But there was another day that stood out in his mind. He was 8 years old. Everything that the synagogue had turned somber and whispers. Finally, his father sat down with him and said, "Son, let me explain to you what is happening. The emperor of the entire Roman world is dying. In a few days, the entire empire will be in mourning over this great and good man. But no one more than those of us who are Jews. For this man has been good to us and kind to us and protected us. He has given us freedoms that we could not have expected and were given to no one else in the world except us. We're the only people in the empire who do not pay taxes to Rome. We're allowed to send all of our taxes to Jerusalem and to the great temple there. The man is passing away. The man who will take his place is named Tiberius. We know little of him except that he's morose, sullen, and we have no idea of his attitude toward the Jewish people. The Emperor Augustus has been good to us, has favored us in every way. We do not know, but we always know this in times like this. And we think of Alexander, who came out of nowhere and conquered kingdoms. And we remember the great men of the Hebrew faith who came and established kingdoms and took over kingdoms and we begin to speaking and thinking and whispering of a coming Messiah. It was at that moment that Saul began to understand who he really was in the great world scheme.
Click here to watch another spiritually rich message from Gene Edwards and continue your journey into the depths of Christ.